they knew that Jesus was going to the cross. And 3 times he went back to the Father, Father, take this cup from my lips. What was he talking about, this cup? This cup is the cup of God's wrath. God had to pour out his wrath on his own dear Son in order to bring about your salvation, my salvation. And this is how it happened. After Gethsemane, he was taken before Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate said, I can't find anything wrong with this man. Send him to Herod. Herod said, I can't find anything wrong. Send him back to Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate said, I still find nothing wrong with this man. I wash my hands of the whole affair. Take him, scourge him, and he handed him over to the priests of the temple. Now they took him to the praetorium, and that's a sanitized version of what they did. You need to know what they actually did. The first thing they did was they plaited a crown of thorns and forced it down on his head. Now I want to show you what that crown of thorns looked like. That crown of thorns, as you could see, had thorns around 2 inches long that were like nails. And those nails, they were forced down into his head, and then it said they beat him over the head with rods. It would have been like knocking nails in a piece of wood. Can you imagine this? And then they pulled his beard until lumps of his beard came out, on the flesh of his beard. They pulled his beard out. They beat him until he was unrecognizable. His eyes would have been closed and blue. His lips would have been swollen. You could not recognize who he was. And then they scourged him. Now, the Romans used an instrument called a flagrum. We're going to put a picture of a flagrum up there for you. This is a Roman flagrum, and victims were scourged or flayed. Now, you've heard of that expression, to flay a man within an inch of death? That's what this was. And to flay means to remove the skin. You can see this is like leather, and on the end of the leather were lead attachments, and in those lead attachments they would put pieces of bone, pieces of shell, pieces of steel, and the whole point of that flagrum was to rip the skin off a man's back. And there is no way that a man could take 39 lashes, because 39 lashes would have just stripped the skin to the bone. And so they would have turned him over, and they would have scourged him on his arms and on his legs and on his front until he'd taken all of those 39 lashes. 39, and it says that by his stripes we are healed. 39 lashes because there are 39 different types of diseases in the world today, but he took 1 lash for every single one. Amen? Jesus was almost skinned alive. You need to know this. You need to understand this. He would have lost an enormous amount of blood. It's amazing that sometimes I've just tried to push a sharp instrument into the palms of my hands to try and imagine what this must have been. But that was just the first part of what Jesus suffered. They then took him from the praetorium to Calvary, and he walked, having lost probably 3 litres of blood already. And they put the cross on his back, and he stumbled under the weight of the cross because he'd lost so much blood. And he walked, they put the cross on Simon's back, and he walked all the way from the praetorium to Calvary. And he shed his blood all the way from the praetorium to Calvary. And people that had been to Jerusalem, and they've walked this walk from the praetorium, which is still there today, to Calvary, and they are overcome with emotion and overcome with incredible grief at the realization that they are walking in Jesus' blood footsteps. And Jesus walked to the cross. And when he got there at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, when the hypocrites who had called for his crucifixion were sacrificing the first Passover lamb in the temple, he nailed him to a cross with nails that were almost an inch square. And they nailed his hands and they nailed his feet, and they put the cross up, and as it dropped into the socket, the agony would have been absolutely excruciating for Jesus. And he hung on that cross for 3 hours between 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock. And in those first 3 hours, as he was hanging in agony on that cross, what came out of his mouth? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then he looked down at you, and you, and you, and you. He looked down and he said, as the blood flowed out of his body, he said, everything that you own now belongs to me. Everything that I own now belongs to you. Can you get your head around that? Jesus said, everything that belongs to you now belongs to me. Your failures, your selfishness, your anger, all of those things Jesus took upon himself. And then said, everything that belongs to me now belongs to you. What an exchange. And then he said the second vow. And what was the second vow? Do you remember? Who remembers the second vow? Everything that you're responsible for, I'm now responsible for. And everything that I'm responsible for, you're now responsible for. Then he took the third vow on that cross. And the next thing he said was, can you remember? What was the next thing that he said? Yeah, no, it wasn't exchanging anything. He was just saying that if you're threatened, if anybody comes anywhere near you, if anyone comes anywhere near you, it's cost me my life. I'm hanging on this cross. I'm giving my life for you now. Would you give your life for me? Would you give your life for me? But then he looked down and made that incredible final vow. I have the right to hunt you down and kill you because you've broken my commandments. You've broken every law. The old law said if you murder or if you commit adultery. Jesus said if you get angry or if you look at another person with lust in your eyes, you've broken the commandments. But Jesus said, I don't condemn you. I will never hunt you down and kill you. I'll forgive you over and over and over and over and over and over and over. But that's not the end of the story. Because at exactly midday, darkness fell upon the earth. Now this was not nighttime darkness. This was not solar eclipse darkness. This was the same darkness that came on the land of Egypt when Moses sent the plague of darkness, or God sent the plague of darkness through Moses into the land of Egypt. It said they could not see their hand in front of their face. It was just darkness. Why did it go like that? At exactly 12 o'clock. And why did Jesus, at exactly 12 o'clock, cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, was what he cried in Aramaic. He was separated from God for the first time in all of eternity. It was no longer father and son. It was man and God. My God, my God. Despite being on that cross for 3 hours, despite being almost skinned alive, he cried out in a loud voice. And the reason that darkness came was because God was about to pour out that cup of wrath, which is what Jesus bled, drops of blood, because he knew the anguish, and God could not bear to look upon his Son as he poured out his cup of wrath upon his own dear, sweet Son. And for 3 hours he was contorted on that cross, and God couldn't bear to look at it. God could not bear to see his own Son take that for you and for you